when we look at exercise, how do we eliminate the things that we do that really don't do much, And so that's a big part of technology, we think, is to give you back time. Here's what you need. Don't bother with this other stuff.
Is that your introduction to me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I like to have you introduce every now and then.
No, you do a nice job since you come more prepared than I am.
I do come more prepared. So, ladies
Yeah.
and gentlemen, that voice you just heard was the sultry tones of the Sultan of Sepsis, Dr. Suraj Saggar. I have to come up with a moniker for myself. Should I let you do it or should I do it myself? I
Let
don't
me
know
think
if I
about
can trust
something.
you.
I was going to think the queen of the kidney, but maybe that's not,
See,
But Sultan of
my
Sepsis
pronouns are he and him. So I am Dr. Clinton
all
Coleman.
right.
Welcome back to Recommended Daily Dose. We have a special guest, Dr. Phil Wagner. He is the CEO and founder of Sparta Science, a movement intelligence company dedicated to helping the world move better. His company, Sparta Science, applies modern data science techniques to help better understand and improve overall health and well-being. That sounds like a mouthful. So I think we're going to try to get into things like movement health, some biomechanics, health technology, injury prevention, stuff like that. So I'm excited to talk to him today. So welcome to the show,
And
sir.
not only that, but I mean, eventually help Clinton, who
Move better.
I know you're an amazing athlete, and we'd love to hear about your how you got into this and your background. But I'm unaware if you knew, Phil, that Clinton also is a very accomplished jazzercise athlete, as well as a competitive speed walker. So I think that
I
this
have I
can,
have an
you know,
Olympic gold medal in both.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm a tennis player and a runner, so I think this is applicable to everyone. But let's start off with you because you are a star sports player, and I understand a football player. Is that right? D1? Is that? Let's start there. How you got into it?
Yeah, I think football is right. It's certainly a traumatic game,
Yeah.
right? And certainly that was a big kind of driver for me to start this company was that there were so many injuries and there wasn't necessarily a recurring pattern. Like it wasn't all knees; it was
Mm.
wrist, hamstring, knee, head, roll the dice, and it wasn't for a lack of training or preparation either, which was equally frustrating. It'd be a lot easier to accept setbacks and injuries if you didn't prepare.
Right. And not only that, just a high level is that the idea is that what you're looking at is injury prevention in sports and movement, but tailored and individual risk reduction. Is that right? Is that my understanding? Is that this is based upon, and I'm going to speak very high level, very, and then you're obviously going to dive into the details, but based upon someone's biomechanics, someone's gaits, their risk for various injuries. And I'm when I was researching and looking at you as a guest and just looking into the background of your amazing company, I think about it, as a runner, like when I go to buy running shoes, is someone a pronator, supinator, an inverter, everter? Do they need shoes with that have more medial support, lateral support, et cetera? So is that kind of at a high level what the basis of your company is about and about your approach to injury prevention?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's kind of looking at movement as a vital sign and how very quickly identify what your movement health is, and then subsequently the best ways to continue moving well or get back to moving well. The only caveat to all this is like, what does moving well mean, right? And so that's where we start to think about technologies that can actually evaluate that and provide some sort of insight very quickly in doing that.
So what kind of data points are you looking at specifically?
Yes.
Full disclosure, I also run our clinical research department here, and there's some interest in movement disorders as we have a large MS, multiple sclerosis department. There's some interest in the MS physicians looking at that. Of course, as ID doc, it's not my expertise, but they're looking at studies. One entity called Hunova, I believe. I may be mispronouncing that, but the idea is that kind of collecting data points and then getting a baseline and different interventions for MS and seeing how that may change one's gait and mobility. But what kind of data points are you looking to collect, and then how does one take that information and then train to prevent injuries, et cetera?
Yeah, we started using a singular device, a force plate, which is a little bit larger than a bathroom scale, gathers thousands of data points a second. So we started there because it's fairly easy to use and it captures a pretty wide breadth of data. And so we looked at basic movements like a jump, primarily in athletics, and then we started in a balance as we started looking at neurological areas, not only for athletes and soldiers with TBI, but then with fall risk in the elderly population. And the idea is that, looking at those patterns of a jump or a balance, once we started to crowdsource enough information from all different populations, locations, we started to cluster or bucket individuals into weaknesses. And from there, once we start looking at interventions, we're able to see, okay, what interventions actually improve or actually degrade these different movement types. We call them movement signatures, right? But I think, looking a lot like pharmaceuticals, you gather blood, really to see, hey, is this working or not, right? And so we kind of look at it the same way. How do we have this very quick movement test to see which interventions are positive or which really don't have an impact? Because I think a lot of times the biggest barrier to exercise, as we all know, is time.
Yeah.
Right.
And so when we look at exercise, how do we eliminate the things that we do that really don't do much, And so that's a big part of technology, we think, is to give you back time. Here's what you need. Don't bother with this other stuff.
Right. And is most of this extrapolated through sports? Because, I have two young boys. They play basketball. When I was growing up, the stuff that they're teaching them now, as far as technique, and especially with like the, basketball itself and the footwork and, things like injury prevention and certain exercises, we didn't have that back in the day. I know if I had that back in the day, I'd probably not be talking to you. I'd probably be on the Lakers or something like that. But it's just the
you should see Clenton shoe collection. That's a whole different podcast. But I
just think that the depth of knowledge we have about sports and what movements are actually, I guess, the correct movements. It's a long way to get to a question. Is like, you think the impetus, because with the athletes, they're the first to use technology. I guess the next step is putting that into like our everyday patients, as far as exercising and weight loss and just lifestyle prevention.
Yeah, and that is why we started in sports, is they often are the soonest to adopt new things, right? And that generally stems from a big drive to win, right?
A competitive advantage.
Right? Do whatever it takes to win, right? So it was a natural place to start. Most of our work now is in healthcare and in the military side of the house, because their issue is they've just got a lot bigger scale, right?
Yeah.
Rather than, hey, I've got you and the Lakers, rather than having 15 people on your team, right? Now you've got, 1,000 people coming through your PT clinics, right? Or you got a 10,000 Army brigade, right? So that mass just makes movement problems magnified, right? And so how can you very quickly, bucket 1,000, 10,000 people into the right groups, because it's highly unlikely they all need the same thing.
Yeah.
And just like pharmaceuticals, we believe some movement can actually do harm, in a lot of cases, and they just, heap on dysfunction, right? So how do you identify that and not do those instead of other options?
So how quickly does this assessment take, since we're talking about time and efficacy? And if you're talking about applying this to, large populations, is this something that's, you're sitting in a chamber for half an hour all day? I mean, I think I was reading something online that this is relatively quick, that you can get a lot of data in a short period of time.
Yeah, our pace car is weighing in. So like, we got to think, hey, this test has to be start to finish, not much longer than it takes to weigh in.
Isn't that something? Okay, right.
Wow. So the idea is, it takes less than a minute to do one of the tests, whether it's a balance or a jump. But the concept being, like, instead of weighing in, why can't you just do a balance, get body weight, because the force plate measures body weight, but you get a million other data points at the same time, right? So this concept of replacing the weight scale is kind of our lofty goal and pace car, if you will.
And are you using like AI or a certain platform to try to, I guess, put all these data points together and spit out something?
Yeah, the device we started with, the force plate, we certainly didn't invent. It exists in a lot of labs and research facilities. The challenge is, right, it produces a lot of data, which requires a lot of technicians and subject matter experts to cleanse it and analyze it. So that's where we, employed a lot of data scientists, machine learning experts to like be able to build in algorithms and models that can spit out those insights in real time, back to the practitioner or back to the patient, right? And that kind of loop, right, is really only possible through more advanced data science like machine learning.
And so I know you mentioned that you started with sports, so football, I think I was even reading rugby, but military, are you also using this in like youth sports as well? Like high schools, or what level, like what other areas is this applicable to?
Yeah, I think any areas where there's mass populations,
right,
and also like high concerns around injury. So there are some youth sports and high schools that are adopting it. The biggest adoption rate we're seeing now is more in physical therapy clinics, and it's a lot around engagement. Right, we've all probably gone through PT at some point, and one of the biggest challenges for therapists is how do they keep the patient engaged, right? Particularly if it's a long rehab process and you don't know if you're getting better, right?
So giving them quantitative data that they can assess right, I see, right,
yeah.
right.
Because you can only do wall sits or some basic PT exercises for so long before you get bored and wonder, is this even working, right? Because they're good interventions that are being used. But how do we use technology, right, to quantify that, to engage the patient and keep them going on the right path?
Yeah, I feel like in healthcare in general, of course, across the board, but specifically in healthcare, since we're all physicians, this is becoming more and more important and really the standard, right? That it's no longer subjectively, I feel better. It's how much do you feel? Even pain scales, 1 to 10.
Yeah.
What does that mean? A smiley face, an upside down face. If you can quantify these physiological responses across the board, you're going to have more productive interventions, etc. And I know that, and I was reading somewhere that it's kind of your mantra, right, of controlling physiological responses. I have to ask, I'm gonna break a little bit here. I was reading about this coherence training where you like to control things, even like getting into sleep. And so since I suffer from insomnia, like a lot of middle-aged guys do, so I was reading something, just explain to me that a little bit about the breathing and the heart rate, and then getting into delta sleep. It's very fascinating to me that I guess given your athletic background and is that something that you do? Is that true? Is that something that is related to this product, or is that something that's just part of your inner being as an athlete, as someone who's interested in fitness?
Yeah, that's more of a we certainly bring in HRV data and
just for our listeners, what is HRV?
So HRV is heart rate variability, and the idea is, right, that it measures the distance between beat to beat of your heart, and the more irregular that distance is, the more random it is, actually the better it is. Because if you're more irregular, random in your beat to beat duration, it's a sign that your nervous system is able to respond to external things in a better way. And so really trying to promote that adaptiveness is a lot of times what helps boost HRV. And a good example is a lot of times athletes play one sport. So people have sport specialization, right? So from a movement standpoint, they lack movement variability, right? So this concept of variability in your heart rate also applies to movement. So when we do assessments like a balance test, we assess your variability in your balance, right? Because what we see, and actually in the research with things like MS and Parkinson's, they have a reduced movement variability. Right, you see that in the regular rigidity, right, of Parkinsonism type symptoms. Right? So what you want in movement is very similar to HRV. You want some variability in how you balance and how you move. Otherwise, things like falls come up. They happen, right, because if you slip, you don't have that variability to respond as well.
Right. the future of this, the evolution would be treatment of, specific disorders like Parkinson's and MS. That'd be great. And now we just do a one size fits all approach to it, medications and things like that. And the therapy doesn't seem to be very effective, but I think we're probably treating the wrong thing.
Or one size fits all, right? That's or not data driven, which I guess is really the key.
Yeah, and sometimes those metrics, right, they're lagging, right? So, if we could use things like looking at movement and health earlier on in the disease process, could some of the things you guys are doing and physicians are doing have a greater impact, right? Because the system's more malleable at an early stage, right, in the disease progression. The best example we use all the time is the country and medicine has done that with diabetes, made a meaningful impact because we started creating pre-diabetic diagnoses, right? Yeah.
Being much more aggressive.
We could probably have pre-movement disorder diagnosis.
That's right.
That'd be awesome.
That's right.
Like, so
MS,
before anyone
Parkinson's
has the physical symptoms of Parkinson's or MS, you could compare, I guess, their whatever parameters they have to the general population, and you could probably maybe make predictions on what their future musculoskeletal issues could be. It's amazing. And I thought I was doing something when I was putting in like ChatGPT, like what's the weather going to be in 10 years? Or they have this one thing where you can do paintings. I thought that was cool. I forgot the name of it, but I've been recently looking into that. This AI stuff is crazy.
Where you could put in paintings and it'll create a painting.
Paint me a shoe, an abstract, and it'll have like.
We're actually trying to use AI to replace nephrologists, so we can maybe.
That's easy. That's easy.
Clinton a little bit more free time to work on his basketball dreams.
But a serious question: do you think physical therapists are like at risk, or the physical therapy industry is at risk?
No, I think it's changing, right? And I think a lot of times, practitioners, may have been trained to focus more on their value in doing the assessment, right? But their value is more on doing the intervention.
Makes sense,
and,
right?
That compliance, that patient practitioner interaction. So I think the idea, hopefully, is that tech frees up more time for that.
Sure.
Right? Because ideally, technology is better suited for assessments. It can gather more data, pick up more things, crowdsource across different areas. All that in real time, which doesn't replace the physical therapist. It kind of shifts their role even more so to what matters.
Yeah, you think even for like we're both in cerebral specialties, ID and nephrology. It's not replacing, but taking some of that data and helping with some of that initial analysis, so you can go further differential diagnosis and you can intervene, medically. I just had a question as I was talking about medicine. What is your background? I mean, is it sports medicine? Were you orthopedics? How did you get? Is it family practice in sports medicine? Like, how did you get into this specifically?
Yeah, so in medical school, I was going down the orthopedic route.
Yeah,
and when it came to match time, I had a mentor at USC in medical school and said, if you're this passionate about changing the system, you're going to have a lot more impact doing it from the outside than from within. So I ended up I finished medical school, didn't pursue a residency. And as a result, kind of, started Sparta with the idea of, hey, let's work with practitioners, let's work with medicine to set up this framework.
But we don't get a whole lot of education in medical school, like biomechanics. So is this something you already had a passion for, background, or did you pursue additional training in biomechanics?
Yeah, no, it was, from my background, I was, worked a lot in strength conditioning and training, but then also went to medical school where they have one of the top biomechanics programs down at USC, Southern California. And that spent a lot of time in the labs there working, to try to, combine all these different disciplines.
Oh, that's fascinating. And, I think you were safety, right? You play football. I mean, but are there any, just out of our own interest, it's not just football, which I think is a very violent sport. We know that, and one can ask, it was not surprising that you're going to have a lot of injuries, but sports like running, tennis, I mean, other sports that are non-contact, you see a lot of room for both assessment and injury prevention in these non-contact sports as well?
Yeah, I think even more so.
Even
right?
more so.
Because,
Okay, right.
in sports like football, I mean, you can't avoid trauma a lot of times. It's a planned car wreck, if you will, every snap. Whereas in sports like tennis and running, right, there certainly are injuries there, but as you know, they tend to be more overuse, right? And so how can you identify ways to combat and prevent some of those overuse injuries by, changing what sort of things you do to support that? And I think the goal is, right, if we can continue to do that, folks will be able to be active in what they enjoy for longer. And that's where some of these big impacts can be, not only in the health systems, but on patients' lives.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I like golf so much, because it has that correlation with technology, like more so than I think any other sport. It's so tech and device heavy, and a lot of it's movement oriented, because I think one of the issues with golf is in the way it's taught, it was taught mostly from, you move in this position and that position, and it's all old school. But now the technology is advanced, so you see what the proper impact positions are, and where the club should be at impact, those types of things. So that's slowly I'm sorry,
right? There's engagement with, like, hey, I was hitting it this far, now I'm hitting it that far, right? And so you get this instant
you get
feedback.
So many crazy data points, like the spin and smash factor and loft and all that stuff. It's like there's no other sport that's like that, I get, at this point. But I'm seeing basketball is becoming like that too, as far as their obsession with the statistics. So I think it's amazing. I hope this actually spills into, like, just general exercise and fitness for patients, because even though the athletes, they do it for a competitive advantage, patients should want to compete to stay alive and be well. So I think we have to, I guess the challenge is, with all this technology we have and all these things that we have as our resource, how do we motivate people to want to be more physically fit and healthier and try to prevent injuries? So thank you for what you do. I think it's amazing.
It's fascinating. You just tell us a little bit in the time remaining. I know you're based in Menlo Park, California, but what is the goals of Sparta? Are you growing exponentially? Are you looking to have a niche market? Is this something that you see the growth potential? What are the plans for the future?
Yes, I think we're grateful. We're experiencing quite a bit of exponential growth as we kind of add this healthcare component.
Right.
Now, a lot of it is around physical therapy, but as we expand, starting to include areas like neurology, like you mentioned, Parkinson's, MS, right?
MS, yeah.
Every condition has some link to movement in some way, either as a cause or result, right? And so how can we better track that and encourage, whether it's pain or obesity that limits movement, right? How can we identify the movement things that are needed to still allow activity to happen or prevent some of those issues from happening in the first place?
I think we always like to end on a light note. So,
well, I have a question.
Clinton plays golf. He actually, very rare situation where he's not wearing his golf clothes. He's actually wearing a white coat and a stethoscope.
I have golf clothes underneath.
Is that real, or is that just peels right off? You go on the golf course right after this. I forgot my question. Also, I went just on a very basic level. So when I go to a running store, now I've even seen this where, we'll just pick running store du jour. Before you buy your shoes, you run on the treadmill, and then you put your feet on kind of like a gel, and they look at your, are you an everter, are you a pronator, supinator, inverter? Is that at a very basic level, kind of what we're talking about? Of course, this is talking about buying shoes, but it looks to me like at a very basic level, very quickly, they're trying to assess what your running gait is and what specific shoes you might utilize to prevent, obviously, overuse injury in the case of long distance running. But I'm assuming this was something that was, I used to go and just buy a pair of shoes and call it a day. Obviously, it's buying running shoes, or like any sports equipment, is you have to, review and read, and it takes, days to figure out which one you want. But I think it's more of just a general statement that I see this more and more so. So not just in running stores, not just in elite sports teams, but I see this across the board. And since we're talking about medicine and hospitals, yes, in neurological departments, MS, Parkinson's, but even in eventually in nursing homes or in geriatric medicine, where which we know falls are so devastating because they lead to hip fractures and then DVTs and PEs and circling the drain and just such a terrible start and just with sometimes unfortunate ends. So from the outside looking in, I see this just, as you mentioned, exponential in terms of healthcare.
Yeah, so many use cases.
Support, et cetera. It's really, I think it's something that's needed. And, like we mentioned, we need to have more objective data that we can analyze and help our patients. So thank you very much for coming on and explaining to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think the interventions piece isn't just exercises. To your point, it can be equipment.
Yeah,
like what shoes you wear, right? Because those all have an impact in some way on how you move.
Right. Even like a tight sweater with a collar that's halfway open would,
You know what? I was working last weekend. I'm finally off. So I said, let's casual Friday, and I may even.
So could you help me? I want to eventually run the New York City Marathon. I've only done 1 5K in my life. At a respectable time, I might say so myself.
He talks about this as if he saved the world. This 1 5K he did, which I believe he walked part of.
It was for Parkinson's. I ran.
No, it's an
and there was a hill
cause.
too. Sucked. But anyway,
a hill, yeah, one hill,
not hilly, a hill. That's right. And a hill in Central Park doesn't count. So it's like it's not even a real hill. But Dr. Phil Wagner, thank you so much for coming on. Talking to us. Do you have any for our listeners, like social media outlets, websites, LinkedIn? Anyone that wants to find more information about your lab and about the great work you're doing, where can they find you online?
Yes, we've got a website, spartascience.com, and then on Twitter @Sparta Science, and then our LinkedIn is similar to Sparta Science. So
we hope all our listeners tune in, and we certainly will as well. So thank you so much for coming on our show. Thank you so much to my colleague Clinton Coleman, who showed up today. Longer hairstyle, I see, and a little bit of a beard going on, and all right, interesting.
This is what the kids are wearing nowadays. I'm trying to be like the kids.
Same with me. My hair could be very.
That's what the kids are wearing.
Okay. Choose the kids this year, But as always, Dr. Suraj, Saggar, Dr. Clenton, Coleman, we are very happy for you to tune in to Recommend Daily Dose. Please rate, listen, and subscribe. And until next time, be well. Thank you.